Let me just start off by saying almost everything that we do is a story. I mean, as kids, when somebody tried to explain me mathematics, unless it was told to me as a story, I didn't get it. The human mind has a particular way that it operates. It turns everything into a fairy tale or a story. And even scientists, when Einstein says, "This is my theory, I have to go out and prove it," even Einstein is telling a story. He's told himself the story of his theory and then goes out to prove his own story. So the best way of education, we find, is stories. So the question, are we telling the right stories, is really, are we in Asia telling the right stories, or are we just in order to be international, are we just dovetailing ourselves into being international and forgetting who we are? Because there is no other way to tell a story except an instinctive way, and that instinctive way comes from who you are. And I could just give you an example, if you really want. When I was asked to do Elizabeth, I was very, very hesitant because, you know, it was what in Britain used to be called a frock film. It was a film a genre that I had no interest in, and so I didn't know whether I'd be able to tell the story. So when I finally said yes, I was faced with this situation: is from what point of view am I going to tell the film? Not the story, there's a script. How am I going to shoot it? How am I going to present her? Am I going to present her from the point of view of how a British director would? How people have seen her for years and years? Or I'm Indian, I'm steeped in Indian mythology, I'm steeped in Indian culture, I learned my filmmaking in what they call Bollywood. Am I going to tell the story from that point of view? And I realized that the only way I could ever succeed in telling that film, or telling that, was what do artists do? They take something and then they interpret that from who they are. I am Asian, so I have to tell my story through being Asian. So I went out and did that, actively did that. There was a point when I was doing a film, doing a scene, and I'm not sure how many of you actually seen or remember that film, but there was a point where Elizabeth discovers that her boyfriend is married and has a child. And it was a great revelation for me. It was a great, very dramatic point of view. Because in that dramatic point of view, the queen doesn't know what her own lover is doing, is what the fundamental issue was. When you get into power, how much do you really know what's going on? And the way I wanted to do the scene, Richard Attenborough and Kate Blanchett said, "Shekhar, it's too melodramatic." And I said, you know what? I don't know what it means. What does it mean when you say it's too melodramatic? I'm not asking you to be melodramatic. I'm not asking the actors to be melodramatic. The situation is melodramatic. And the reason I'm giving you that example is because there's a fundamental, because if you ask me, so is there a difference between how we tell stories in Asia and how stories are told in the West? Here's the difference. And I said, I see this point as melodrama. I'm not asking the actors to be melodramatic. Let me shoot it my way, you don't be melodramatic. I did it my way, and the audience reaction was amazing. So here's the difference. If you're telling stories from where you stand, where you are, or where I am is Asian, we come from cultures that have a different word for melodrama. We call melodrama being mythic. So we believe that life is mythic. I believe, to be born is mythic, melodramatic. To die is mythic, melodramatic. To fall in love is mythic, melodramatic. To be betrayed is mythic, melodramatic. There is something about us that believes that we have a certain destiny. If you look at great Asian stories, there is something about it that we believe that there is something about us that we are destined. Things that happen to us often are destined to happen. In the West, the philosophy says that your individual will is stronger than your predetermined destiny or your karma. And when you look at the way they tell the stories and the way we tell our stories, the story might be the same. Our interpretation, the way we tell that story, becomes different because there are fundamental difference in philosophies. Is it that vastly different? No, The difference is interpretation. So why is this question important? Let me come back again. If you are Asian directors aspiring to tell international stories, do you go and make films in, I mean, we just saw Chen's film, which is completely him, even though he lives in London, he's made his film here in Singapore. He's completely interpreted who he was at that time. And the film, I would say, some people say is hugely emotional. I would proudly say it's Asian and it's melodramatic, but not melodramatic in a bad way, melodramatic in a very beautiful, wonderful way. So that's some fundamental difference. As Asian cinema is rising, as consumers, and we are all rising, so we are developing, our audiences are getting more and more power. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. When they make Spider-Man 6, Spider-Man, when he takes his mask off, he'll probably be Chinese. If not Chinese, he'll definitely be Indian. He'll be one of those two. And when he does that, he'll probably be swinging from Shanghai, and if he's not swinging from Shanghai, he'll be swinging in Mumbai. And if Singapore gets its act together, he'll probably be swinging in Singapore. So there is that kind of a shift happening. In that shift, how do you take advantage? Why do all Asian filmmakers go to Hollywood and live there? What is the potential of Asian filmmakers creating international films, living in their own places, being influenced by their own cultures? Chinese filmmakers have, Hero and Crouching Tiger and films like that. They've done that very effectively. What else is the difference? I mean, when I look at Hero, there is something about Eastern storytelling that is kind of open-ended. What does that mean? It means that if you take Monkey King is a classic tale in China. And the tale of Monkey King actually doesn't end. The classic tale in Mahabharata in India, where we say all stories come out of, there's not a single story that is not enclosed in the myth of Mahabharata. It never ends. The moment you end one story, there's another question. When you answer the fundamental questions, the plot that arises in one story, at the end of that story, actually 10 other questions have turned out. So we have this ability to comprehend never-ending stories. And therefore, it's not surprising that a film like Life of Pi does much, much larger business in Asia. It's a big hit in the US, but you look at the numbers in Asia, because Life of Pi, in a way, was a very Asian story and a very beautiful, mythic form of Asian storytelling, where it's philosophical in the way that it is offering you far greater questions to ponder and take home than it is answering for you. At the end is asking, so who was the tiger? Was the tiger the ego? I tried that in Elizabeth. I don't know how many of you remember that. But in the end, the last scene of Elizabeth, when she comes out in a white makeup, she says, I am now a virgin. What does that mean? What does it mean for a woman to suddenly say? Because I found in all of the press that I saw, they all said she's a virgin queen, and I said, well, how do you know? That was 600 years ago. And then so I took virginity and made it into an explanation of a political, it's a political idea, saying, I am now a virgin. But what does that mean? What does that actually mean? Does it mean that I have now taken on the mantle of Mary? You know, Mother Mary, have I now said that I'm dropping my sexuality? Am I freeing myself from my sexuality? Am I adopting a further stance of spirituality? It could mean 20 different things. And that was the last scene of Elizabeth. I remember somebody called me and said, very huge American paper gave a review of Elizabeth. And somebody phoned me and said, hey, they gave you a terrible review. I said, I wanted to put the phone down, not hear about it. But I mustered the courage and I said, what did they say? They said, it's a Bollywood film. I said, that's an amazing review. It must be an amazing review. That's what I went. So Elizabeth, that was nominated for 8 or 9 Oscars, The New York Times called it a Bollywood review, a Bollywood film. So where are we? You know, there is some kind of thing, and I found that to be an amazing compliment. So I think that's the kind of thing that I would like to raise. I've been trying to make an independent film for a long time. I decided at one point that when I'm asked to do a Hollywood film, I try and bring that mythology to it, and sometimes I don't succeed, and I want to stay with that mythology not because I don't want to do the films, but I think that in doing that, I may not be doing what I'm best at. Why do a film if somebody else can do it better than you? So I'm now doing a film called Pani, and I'm doing a big TV series for Fox on Rasputin, because I find Rasputin in itself is such a huge mythic story. And when I pitched Rasputin out to the studio, here's how I pitched it. I said, and it's a very Eastern way of looking at it. I said, Rasputin, the big question is, was he Christ or was he Antichrist? And isn't that the fundamental question in all Eastern mythology? Who are we? Are we good? Are we evil? Who are we? Ultimately, we have an evil side and a good side, both enclosed into one individual. And therefore, I went for Rasputin. On the feature film side, what I'm doing is a film called Pani. Pani means water. And I did not know how, because films are going more and more towards visuals. Now what's happening is the production design is telling you a greater story than the plot. And if your production design can tell you a great story, then you take some of the weight off the plot, and the plot can actually become more subtext. So how much of that can you put into the design of the film? And Alex McDowell, who's done Superman and Fight Club and all, we work together a lot on these ideas of world building. So let me show you, even before I wrote the script of the film, what I did. This is a downloaded version, so it might be pixelated a little bit, but I just wanted to show it to you to show how I'm trying to tell a story from an Eastern point of view that is mythic in its way, just through the design of the film. And then I started to write the script. I created the world before I wrote the script. So if you guys can do it, and if you have or if I've given you the right downloads, yeah. I think you need sound. So thank you very much. That was pretty good. It was a little thank you. Thank you. So it's a little pixelated, so I apologize for that. But I just wanted to show how today, when you're out to make your films, the audiences worldwide are they're really tuned into you. And if they're tuned into you, they're watching everything that you do. And one of the things that audiences maybe 20 years ago, because we didn't have the facilities 20 years ago, today are picking up information by every message that you give. And the messages that you give in your design are really important. So you can take some of the plot and put it into design. So mythology. Let me talk about storytelling and mythology in this, and then I'm going to open it to questions. Because I'd really like to know, because I could go on talking about this. I built that before. I had a story in mind. You cannot live in Asia or in India, certainly, and not be aware of water problems. You'll probably recognize the upper city. I certainly recognize the lower city. I see it every day in Mumbai. I can see which way the world is heading. I decided to create one city of the future where the upper and the lower city live together. Why was the upper city on top? And why is the lower city on the bottom? We have a mythology, a mythic saying in India, and in Hindi it goes, Amir garibon ke kandhon pe rehte hain. We say it all the time. What it means is that the rich live on the shoulders of the poor. So those pillars that you see holding the upper city up, they exist in the lower city. The pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid supports the top of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid cannot survive if the bottom of the pyramid crumbles, and it supports the weight of the top of the pyramid. So the design came out of mythic ideas. And so I made this, I presented this when I went to Hollywood. A lot of Hollywood big people were interested. The problem was, I knew this would happen. I was really scared this would happen. They all said, oh, it's beautiful. I wrote a script, and they said, why can't we increase the love story a little bit? And you know, when I was thinking of the love story, I knew that it would take away from the fundamental mythology of what I was doing. Of course, there's a Romeo and Juliet story in there, but that's only because there's a genre of love stories in every film that you do. If you do the sinking of the Titanic, you write a love story. If you're doing Avatar, which is about what we're doing to a planet, you write in a love story. It's the one genre of great mythic genre that surpasses all geographies, all cultures. But my big fear was that people would say, oh, because they would hang on to the most comfortable thing in the film. And to me, the most attractive thing about the film is its discomfort. And I think, for example, if you looked at this very successful film like Slumdog Millionaire, which has probably done $500 million, which is made in India, the most attractive thing about it is the discomfort of it. You sit in there and you're trying to escape it, but you're enjoying it at the same time, and you don't know what to do. And therefore, it kind of holds on to you. And if I took the discomfort out and just made it into a beautiful love story, I have this great fear that the film would be less comfortable, or more comfortable, and then it will neither be that effective, nor would it be as successful. So let me turn it over to you. I've given you examples of how I'm thinking now. I'm hoping more and more Asian directors would say, and not have to do what I had to do. Was if I wanted to make international films, I made Bandit Queen, I got an agent, I went to live in Hollywood. I struggled to keep my identity. I came back to India to make this film. I now live in Mumbai. I go for meetings, I'll spend a month there, I'll come back to Mumbai, because when I come back to Mumbai, I'm reminded of my mythology. I'm reminded of my culture. I'm reminded fundamentally of who I am. And as long as I know who I am, how can any artist create anything except from the fundamental churning of who that artist is? So you have to digest it into who you are. So, questions, please. Otherwise, I'll drone on. Yes. Any questions? Somebody here? Anybody? Don't be shy. I'm not. Are there any filmmakers here? Yes. Yes, so let me talk about funding. Ultimately, because of my fear that if I made this film in Hollywood, they would iron out. The question was, have you secured funding for the film? I've now secured funding. The film is about $30 million, and I've secured funding from an Indian company. We're making this independently. They're fully funding the $30 million. And with that kind of confidence, I can go out and get all the casting that I need. Yeah, it's 100%. It took a long time. It took me 3 years to get funding, to find the right funding, to hold final cut. You know, that's also really, really in independent cinema or any cinema, to hold all the creativity as my power in my hand was difficult. So one Indian company called Yash Raj Films, who are one of the most successful, they've probably done everything that they can in India, and have grown to be one of the largest and most successful. This they're seeing as their foray into international cinema. Take a very, very Indian, you know, A.R. Rahman, who did Slumdog Millionaire and got many Oscars for Slumdog and for 127 Hours, is doing the music. That's bit of the music is there. There are songs in the film too. It's not like so. But then, why would I let songs go? Why would I let music go? Because it's fundamentally steeped into my blood. You know, when I think of a film, I've missed shooting music. The idea of the rhythm of music and the rhythm of cinema and the rhythm of the visuality of cinema and the storytelling of cinema is so steeped together that sometimes I feel, why did the West lose how to do West Side Story? I mean, Baz Luhrmann from Australia is constantly bringing it back. Even if his films are not musicals, there's music in them. And even if there are no songs, you can sense the musical rhythms of the film, and that's why they're so beautiful to watch. Why did the nation that made West Side Story not make at least hundreds of musicals from there? So yes, I've secured funding. Thank you. Into the cast? So, go ahead. What percentage of the budget is going into the cast? That's a question. Depends on, right now we are out to and potentially going to be getting, there are 5 main characters in it. 2 or potentially 3 of them are from the West. But the 2, depending who we are out to, and I think in the next month we'll know, we're looking at price and schedule. So we've put a budget of 30 or 35 million. If it's a major, major star, they will push the budget up, but then when you do your foreign sales, you get the money back. The important thing is we hold the rights. We hold the rights, and we'll do the foreign sales. And the idea is that we'll give it to a major studio to release. But because we are not asking them for money, we've got the money to shoot it. We will need them for distribution. We can't distribute it ourselves, obviously. Although the Indian company that I'm working on, Yash Raj Films, you know, Indian films have a diaspora market. They regularly make, the big ones make $10, $15 million worldwide anyway, you know, the really big ones. The biggest one, actually, you know, 11 years ago, Monsoon Wedding made $30 million worldwide. And that was 11 years ago. That was amazing. Nothing's touched that since. But of course, you know, it won Venice and went on from there. The question that keeps getting asked is, are you telling an international story? There is a way, stories are international. What changes is the way you do it. That's why if you go to the US today, they'll tell you many, many things. And one of the things is, when I first went there, many things were said. Can you make a film, Shekhar, that will appeal to Midwest? That changed. Can you tell a film that will give it can I get some great trailer moments? That's because the first weekend became very important. The question that is being asked now is, will it sell internationally? That's the fundamental question. As the international market is gradually moving from being 20-30% to about 60-70% of the large cinema markets, it probably go up to 80. Once your international market is 80% of your box office revenues, you're looking to the West. And that's the great opportunity for filmmakers sitting in Asia, is that we are the market now. We're the marketplace. and if we are the marketplace, how do we adapt? It is not that Hollywood is suddenly dead. Hollywood knows how to market these films. There is a reason why Spider-Man is huge in India and Spider-Man is huge in China, is because they know how to make these films, they know how to market these films. But there's also a reason why we adapt to films like Spider-Man more, because they have a great sense of mythology in them. But there is a way to go further. When I watch Hero, which is one of my favorite films, and I watch it again and again, I keep asking myself, my God, you know, look at this story. Sometimes, even in the West, I told some friends of mine who producers and finances, I said, hey, here's a story, right? There's a guy who lies in a coffin. And then you open the coffin, and he comes out of the coffin, and he's suddenly got a tail and scales. And he goes out and he falls in love with a girl who's got tail and scales. Would you like to spend $200 million on the film? No. Of course, it's the story of Avatar. Ultimately, when you look at it, that's the love story. You know, it's like, but what's the subtext? What's the fundamental mythology that you're using? That's the idea. So I'm saying this again and again because the opportunity in the next 5 years for Asian filmmakers is huge, and the opportunity is to take advantage of how to adapt international storytelling to the idea, to who you are. But you have to try and adapt international storytelling, find stories that will move internationally, that can be actually distributed by and understood by Hollywood distribution machines, which are huge. And how do we tell our stories? Because we are the ones that live here, we are the ones that know our markets. So when I say we are the ones that know our markets, the question that I get asked often is, so China and India are completely different, what are you talking about? Yeah. How many of you have heard about Monkey King? Everybody, right? Raise your hands, don't be shy. Everybody has. How many of you heard about Hanuman? The Indians will. Oh. Just look at the way, how close together the stories, even the storytelling of the two characters are, right? The idea of melodrama is huge in Chinese films. The idea of family is huge in Chinese films. The idea of music is huge in Chinese films. The idea of melodrama is huge in Indian films. The idea of family, one brother gets lost, huge. Or somebody, or the girl is married away somewhere and she doesn't get along and she runs away, then finally the lover finds her, comes back to family. Family is huge. The idea of family is huge in India and China. So our fundamental stories, our fundamental cultures are very, very similar. And that happens all over Asia. And so there's a reason why Indian films, for example, are very popular in Morocco and Indonesia and Thailand and China. They used to be. Now the Chinese policies have been a little different. But the storytelling of the fundamental storytelling is very, very similar. So I'm just making an argument here that there is an Asian kind of, if you diversify or make your ground a little larger, there is an Asian cultural of storytelling that transports to film and television. And so there's a commonality in Asian storytelling. There's a question there?
Hello. Oh. Do you ever face a conflict between the story you want to tell and the story that you think will sell? And if so, how do you reconcile that?
Do I ever find a conflict between the story that I want to tell and the story that will sell? For me, the fundamental way stories rise is a moral conflict. That's what storytelling is. Everything is a conflict. A great piece of music is a conflict between notes. A great poem is a conflict between words. Storytelling is moral conflicts. So what I do, for example, Pani, the story of Pani, of how it arose in my mind was, I heard an Indian politician that everybody, because he was rural and we are all urban elite, he made a statement that, and we all used to make fun of him, and I read one of his statements and he said, do you know, he was talking to the farmers and he was giving a lecture, and I saw it on television 12 years ago. And he said, do you know that these guys who live in cities, in one flush, they will expend as much water as is not as available to you for your whole family in one day. That's got me thinking. That I, in my one flush, am I letting go as much water as a whole family, more than a family in a rural area can get for cooking, bathing, washing, drinking, everything. That started off. Then I started to explore this idea. And inside me, it created a huge moral conflict. I then suddenly realized that Elizabeth's story was the same as Indira Gandhi's story. The day I realized that, I said yes to Elizabeth. It's exactly the same story. And so then I started to adapt to it, and then I started to sit with the writer and work it out. So the answer to your question, the moral conflict has to be something that lives within me. Story we can adapt. That's like Pani. Yes, question here.
In a world where you have international storytelling and international sales, what does it take coming from?
Sorry, can you take the mic and then everybody can hear you? Thank you.
Sorry, in an international world where international storytelling and international sales are crucial, and you coming from an Asian background, what is your take on the language that you actually use for films? I mean, we've heard it in previous talks where English is the most important language in order to make the film be a commercial success. What's your take on this?
Yeah, we went through a lot in Pani, what you just saw. In fact, we'd prefer to call it Pani than water, or somebody else made water, but we like the word Pani. It flows better. Like water flows, the word Pani flows. We went to, should we make it in Hindi, shall we make it in English? How stupid is it to make Western characters speak English? Well, then supposing it's... So then we just decided that all the Western characters will speak English, all the Indian characters will speak Hindi. When the Indian characters speak to each other, they'll speak Hindi. When the Western characters and the Indian characters, unless there's a reason for them to be able to speak Hindi, will speak in English. Whichever accent they had. I did do one thing though. There is something when you say English, it's not English. It's the American accent. You have to understand that there's a little difference. It's the American accent, and I suddenly realized that when the American accent comes into conflict with other languages, for some reason it stands out more, the conflict stands out more. So I made the Western character French-Canadian. So you have a slightly French accent. But I think that the world is accepting subtitles. I would prefer a film, whenever I watch Gandhi, but I have no problem. Gandhi was made in English. After a while, it's fine as long as you won't need to get it out. But if there's a very specific reason that it cannot be made in English, I think that the world is coming to subtitles. I saw Elizabeth in Italian. I saw Bandit Queen in German. You know, so anyway, 80% of your audiences are going to see it dubbed. So this thing about should I make it in English or in Hindi only refers to some very fundamental, it's Australia and the UK and the US. The rest of the world will see a dubbed version anyway because they'll all dub it in the local languages, barring a few main theaters. So what have I said? I said yes. I think that the world is accepting subtitles and therefore foreign language films. It makes it more authentic. But I have no problem with making films in English. I don't think Gandhi was a worse film because everybody spoke English, even though in real life they must have all spoken Hindi. Yeah? Any questions? How am I doing for time? Do I have time? Okay. Any more questions? No. All right. How are we doing for time? Otherwise I'll speak a little bit more. I'll take off something else. Where are we with time now? Somebody tell me. How many more minutes? Yes? Just tell me. 5 minutes more. Okay. I was hoping. Yes. Bobby?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When are you expected to release this film, Pani? How much you've done, work completed so far?
When am I expected to release Pani? We start shooting in April, May 2014. We've been prepped for a year. We have a production design department in Los Angeles. We have a production design department in India, so they can both tie up and work together. Yeah, We start shooting in April 2014, and then whatever time it takes. It's shot in 3D, so it's a little complex. So, and we're doing an IMAX version also. So we're doing everything that international films do, except we're doing it as it is a fundamentally Indian film. Yeah?
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm from the Philippines. I came from a country where everyone is almost a big movie fan. My question has something to do with what you were talking about a while ago, about going back to basics, going back to the fundamentals. Based on your experience, years of experience in Hollywood, what do you think, if you can pinpoint only just one, what is the most fundamental story that can garner a universal appeal? Is it a love story? Is it stories on family?
If there are universal stories. There are many books written saying there are only 36 stories in the world, and all stories have come out of that. I don't know. I've never thought about that. Yes, of course, the fundamental story is a love story. Yeah. And because everybody aspires to be young, the youth stories, this film is a sensual medium, you know, and therefore the sexier your characters look, the more attractive the film looks, and more people want to go and see it because everybody aspires to be. The youth and sensuality are big sellers. So yes, love story. The second most is revenge. You know, so many of these superhero stories are based on revenge. Somebody goes and kills somebody else, so there's the whole universe goes to, you know, planets will go to war, Star Wars will happen, all kinds of things, because there's fundamentally an idea of revenge going on there. Father-son stories have become very popular, always have been. So right from Finding Nemo, father-son story, even in like that's very mythic. It's a very mythic idea. In the U.S. culture, the father and the son, how important mother and son relationships in our cultures are, whether it's Singapore or China or in India. We always talk about the relationship between mother and son. There was a time when you couldn't make a film in India without saying the hero always had to be, the hero didn't exist unless the hero had a mother. Now we're away from that, but in the US, the father-son relationship is a big idea. So there's lots of films made around those ideas. Yeah, I saw. Does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Any other story? Any other ideas and stories? I'll tell you a little story and then I'll leave. When I was asked once, what's the nature of stories? Why do we tell stories? Why? So, all stories were told because fundamentally we needed to come and explain that we cannot explain. So when we cannot explain that, we want to explain. So when we didn't understand lightning, man made up stories to explain. There was a god of lightning, and then he was angry, and then he was the roar of his anger was a thunder, and lightning came down and struck that was evil. We've always made up stories to understand that. And the fundamental, if you're all, you know, all of us in the East understand this concept of us coming to terms with the infinite selves of ourselves, God, or whoever God is, or whatever God is, the idea of infinite space, infinite ideas, how do we get in touch with it, or has created a yearning in all art. The aspiration towards that which is infinite can describe a lot of what we desire to do. So let me tell you a little story. Let me make it up and tell you a story, and then I'll tell you where that comes from. Imagine that you're in a parachute. Imagine that you're floating down on a parachute. That's your life, right? And the parachute is the fabric of yourself. And you're floating down through life. And if you want to go right, you have a little bit of control, you can go right. If you want to go left, you have a little bit of control, you can go left. There'll be a storm. But you're okay because that fabric of self, the self is strong. And you can hold yourself together and somehow you'll survive it. You have hope you'll survive that. And then you keep floating down life. And somebody comes up to you and says, why don't you look up? And you say, hey, I don't need to look up. Why would I look up? And says, well, just look up. And when you look up, there's no parachute. There never was. It was your imagination, and then you scream. And then you say, oh my God, I'm falling. Help, I'll crash into something. And it says, but there's nothing to crash into. Well, if there's nothing to crash into, then where did I fall off from? There was nothing to fall off from. So you fell off nothing. You have nothing to crash into, and you think you're falling. So then you say, come on, who am I? And it says, that's the right question. You've now finally asked the right question. Who am I? But here's what we do. We create gods that threw us off something, and we create gods that help us survive storms, and we create good gods that's trying to save us when we fall, and we've created an innumerable number of mythologies, from top to bottom to everywhere, to explain how we handle this parachute. So fundamentally, in order to explain our existence, we created mythology. So there were devils, demons, and angels, and everything that came to support us, to destroy us, and in conflict with each other. And all over the world, these mythologies arose. Out of those mythologies, we're still telling stories. Every film that's a big hit will be related to one of the mythologies that were developed by our own attempt to explain ourselves. I think the next session is here. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful being here. Thank you.